Why is Michelle autonomously queuing up to go and speak to Susan? Oh, insult! Insult twice! I'm fine with that. On you go, Michelle. Go ahead and insult Susan. That should be fun. I love that they're both talking about themselves as well, right at the start of the conversation. And Susan's already decided she doesn't want to see Michelle. She wants to go and look in the mirror. But first Michelle's going to insult her. It's interesting, I haven't done much to encourage it, but everyone in the asylum over time, their relationship with Susan has just depleted. The only one that hasn't really is Glenn, but then we have to remind ourselves that Glenn is evil. So...
Plavar Samso? Quinka Blesh.
Last time on our Asylum challenge, Michelle achieved the first milestone of her aspiration. For the second milestone, she will have to reach level 4 of the knitting skill, knit an item whilst listening to music, and sell an item on Plopsy. And we can quickly take care of one of those by adding a music playing device to the Asylum. And with this in place, and putting on some music, Michelle was able to check off the first part of the second milestone of her aspiration. Michelle had in fact also checked off another point on the second milestone of her aspiration because she had already reached level 4 of the knitting skill. The next part would be for her to sell something on Plopsy, and in order to do that she would need to actually knit something worth selling on Plopsy, which unfortunately she hadn't managed to do so far. Not that this is to say that the work that Michelle does is typically subpar, just that sometimes one has to ask oneself the question of how did Michelle get into the position that she's in, because some of the work she does is not necessarily up to the standard you might expect from someone in her position. And so there was nothing else for it but for Michelle to continue knitting, and hopefully she would eventually produce something of decent quality, or at least something that some person on Plopsy would be prepared to pay for. As knitting required Michelle to be seated and with space in front of her, she was limited to knitting either in the rocking chair or on the benches on the roof of the asylum, and as the weather wasn't particularly great, the better choice was obviously the rocking chair. Maybe it wasn't quite so obviously the better choice, because the rocking chair was unfortunately situated in the dining room, which tended to be the area where most of the other inmates of the asylum gathered, making it almost impossible for Michelle to get away from them. In fact, knitting was forcing her to be around them almost all the time. Realistically, Michelle should have knitted something of good enough quality that she'd have been able to sell it on Plopsy, and yet still that was not the case. Despite the fact that she had now reached knitting level 7, she still hadn't managed to produce something that someone actually wanted to buy, which is really saying something, because sometimes, even listing something of poor quality on Plopsy, usually there's someone willing to pay for it. In this case, however, not so. Michelle had enjoyed successes in her life, thanks to others propping her up, and this knitting aspiration was the first time that she was solely responsible for her own success. And perhaps unsurprisingly, progress was slow. Despite having an inventory full of panda beanies, and having most of them already listed on Plopsy, Michelle still had not managed to get a sale. Perhaps it seemed unoriginal to have Michelle just knit the same thing over and over, but doing the same thing over and over, no matter how unoriginal, uninspired or basic it was kind of Michelle's style. Following that path had never failed her in the past, so why bother changing? And listing yet another panda beanie onto Plopsy, Michelle still just had to wait. And so it continued for some time. Michelle knitted more and more panda beanies, and although they increased slightly in quality, and although she listed them all on Plopsy, she still wasn't getting any interest in them. And then, finally, Michelle got the notification she'd been waiting for. Someone had bought one of her lovely panda beanies on Plopsy. someone with the username Crumplebottom1. So which one was that? Was it the nice one, or was it the arsehole one? Given the quality of the product, it was probably the arsehole one. And so, with one of her many listings on Plopsy finally sold, Michelle shipped out the item to Crumplebottom1, and in doing so, she checked off another point of her aspiration. And in fact, that meant she had completed the second milestone of her aspiration, taking her halfway through the aspiration and one step closer to leaving the asylum. And with that, we'll leave Michelle's story there for today. Join us next time as Michelle embarks on the third milestone of her aspiration, where she will have to knit 10 excellent items. Given how long it took for her to knit something that sold on Plopsy, that's not going to take very long, is it? She will have to successfully gift 3 items, reach level 6 of the knitting skill, which she has in fact already done, and she will have to successfully show off a sweater she has knitted. Join us next time to see how she gets on. Thanks for watching. Is that who I think it is? Is that Ailish? It is. Ailish can't stay away from the asylum. You know, you would think finally getting away from this place and all of these terrible people, that they would stay away and just enjoy their freedom. But they keep coming back.